And now it's time to jump back into action, and we'll do that by talking about AI. How does it help with energy management, boosting efficiency, optimizing systems, and enhancing sustainability in energy networks? So let's hear it from the experts. First up, we have Jan-Willem Rombouts, founder and CEO of Beebop. Welcome. Next, we have Andreas Langholz, head of technology of Ingrid Capacity. Then we have Ellen Smeele, SCT Ventures. And to moderate this panel, I would like to invite Namratha Kothapalli, investment principal at Speedinvest. Hi. Enjoy, guys. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Really excited for a fantastic panel today. To kick off, I'd love a quick round of introductions from you all, and would love to hear your perspective on AI is so buzzy these days. Like, you cannot, live like an hour a day without hearing of all of the new innovations happening in AI. Equally, on the other hand, in the spaces that you operate in, energy is extraordinarily complicated, regulated, kind of slow-moving. What's your view on if the hype around AI can deliver in energy transition?
I can start from our context. I think where AI has to be relevant is where it's really needed and where it solves real problems rather than being a nice to have. And I think in terms of complexity, the power system, the power grid, has more than enough problems to solve that are highly complex, and where AI can really make a difference. In our case, what we are faced with is customer assets, home batteries, rooftop PV, heat pumps, EVs. And all of these assets are sitting behind the meter at customer homes. And these customers don't have access to where the real value is in the power system, which is oftentimes in wholesale energy markets, not just day ahead, but intraday markets, 15-minute by 15-minute blocks, or grid markets where grid operators use flexibility. Now, the complexity is that in the world of power systems, of trading, grid operations, you want extremely high reliability, just like using a gas-fired plant or like using a utility-scale battery. But then on the other hand, you have these super complex, unreliable resources. And so to bridge that is for us a fantastic use case of AI, because in a way, if you don't use AI, it's very hard to make that work, even from a cost perspective. Sort of, you can't build systems that scale linearly with the assets under management. And it's very hard to sort of control 1 million assets minute per minute with control strategies without having deeper modeling there.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, but maybe to add to this, I think we represent quite sort of a nice continuity of the system, where what we do at Ingrid is we solve for the grid and the sort of the problem of transportation of power. And we do that both with digital and physical assets, so mainly operating large BESS in the Nordics, and also help the grid companies steer and make planning and decision and really sort of making efficient decisions on how to funnel the green transition in the grid. And I think the promise of AI essentially applies very well, right? It is making informed decision faster and smarter and more scaled, and taking decisions on information that's bigger than a human can do. So there's the energy industry is obvious. Then the practical challenges, and I think that's what we're going to discuss, right? How do you do it right? I think we see a lot of buzz today with reinforcement learning and large language models, and in essence, it still comes down to the core fundamental business logic. Are you unlocking better, greener, and cheaper energy for the end consumer? and domain expertise is becoming more and more important, and also the classics of data foundation, and maybe the boring problems are actually the real ones to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And how about you, Andreas?
Yeah, thanks for being here. Some of you might have expected Paul Murphy, a pretty well-known Lightspeed investor. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, which meant I had to step in. So I'll try my best to fill his shoes. But he became quite famous with the post of climate tech is dead. I don't believe that. I think climate tech is very much relevant, especially in the energy domain. That's what I want to talk about here. So really the optimistic view of why we think the energy transition is well underway and only going to accelerate even further. And we believe at Set Ventures that AI actually plays an important role in that. We think AI, on the one hand, is sort of like a productivity tool. So I think we see a lot more things that can be done. And Namratha, you talked about the energy known to be slow and regulation taking long. And I think we see an opportunity here for AI to accelerate blue-collar workers, installations of distributed energy assets, but also sifting through applications and permitting much faster. So that's a great opportunity, as well as I agree with the other speakers on the grid orchestration side. How do we use flexibility? That's a very incredible and super interesting challenge that we have. And I think AI is promising for that one as well.
Absolutely, yeah, that makes sense. I want to touch on something you two mentioned, like the founders in the room, essentially. You, Jan-Willem, you want to, as a CEO, want to deliver commercially ASAP, as quickly, right? What is the biggest frustration for you in terms of commercializing or implementing on the AI side of things? Equally for you, Andreas, because you're the techie, you want to move fast and get things going. How do you reconcile the two?
Yeah, so maybe to build on something that was mentioned as well. Before you start looking at solving these complicated problems on the power system with AI, the first thing you might do is actually look at your software engineering processes and think, where can I use AI to just make that much more efficient? I'm sometimes a bit frustrated about the last mile there. And so if I challenge my engineers on, for instance, we do integrations with other OEM platforms, documented APIs. It's a very good use case, it seems to me, to automate that from a software engineering side, and not to spend 5 weeks on that, but to spend 3 days on that, focus on the testing. And then I oftentimes as feedback get, yeah, but if we use some of these AI tools, it does it almost right, but we still need to spend a lot of time on that last mile getting it right. And so they're much more sort of focused on things like Copilot, sort of these type of autocomplete tools in the software coding, rather than to really trust AI to write the whole integration. And so that last mile problem is something that I really see in practice. And I sometimes wonder, is that just because I've experienced engineers who have been working in certain patterns and it's hard to break through? I'm not 100% sure. Or maybe these tools then. I mean, I use ChatGPT quite regularly, sometimes for market research, it makes mistakes, and it sometimes doesn't get you exactly what you want, so you see that last mile issue there as well. I think on the deep problem solving there, let's say that I have more grace to the fact that we really need to test systems very deeply before we release. The last thing that you want is hallucinations on the power grid every day. That would not be a great first use case for AI on the power grid. So yeah, those are two thoughts. Yeah.
Absolutely. Andreas, do you have anything to add or respond to?
I mean, I have a long list of tech frustrations to integrate. No, we deploy AI in some shape or form across our whole value chain, right? And I completely echo this. The actual integration and sort of software principles are becoming very important. One thing we see, we work a lot with public, semi-public entities, TSO, DSO, so forth. And it's very much on the people in this room and on us as sort of entrepreneurs in this space to communicate the value of why is intelligent important for the system? Why should a local Swedish municipality spend energy on exposing their data and think about this, and what is their benefit? And often it's not out of spite, it's because they don't even know what they're missing, right? And then I really liked your point. if we talk a lot about our really cool identifying sites across Europe with large-scale AI and power trading, but we get a lot of value from just automating contracts in legal and procurement. And this, I think, really also, people haven't fully grasped how much value now comes from increased efficiency of, I put 600 people through an LLM in this event, right, to find best investors for us. And we remove a lot of paperwork and friction. Finding investments, finding good contracts, finding solutions that were usually extremely manual. And there is a long way to go, but it's a very exciting.
No, thanks for sharing that. Completely resonates. I'm also, I think, like all of us, daily users of all things free, OpenAI included. Appreciate it. Ellen, you're very deep into energy space. I think we also talk very regularly about all things energy. So I'm curious to hear your point of view in terms of what are the most exciting opportunities for you when you think of AI at the intersection of energy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think one of the things that we at Set Ventures think is very exciting is that we need to digitize our grid infrastructure, and we can get a lot more out of the existing infrastructure that we have. So for an example, in the Netherlands alone, the grid operator this week found 9 gigawatt of additional capacity by only allowing that to be used in certain time frames. That is still a very rough, here, these 2 hours no, and the rest of it is yes. Because they don't have enough visibility on the infrastructure as a whole to actively steer that. So what we believe is the great opportunity for AI is if you can digitize those assets, you have more visibility on what's actually happening and where, and can then translate that into price signals where guys like Jan and Sebastian sort of can trade on that. I think then you have an immense opportunity to get a lot more out of the existing infrastructure, and you don't have to do everything. Yeah, so you don't have to sort of change the way and dig a hole, build lots of new cables. We still need to do some of that, but we see an immense opportunity for AI to digitize our grid and be much smarter with the assets and the infrastructure that we have. So that's something that we do. And then if you look at where to start, sometimes it's also still, as you said, on the last mile. How do you integrate? How do you connect? I think that's where we are, because the energy system is slow and it's not yet digitized, as we see in other industries. So we look a lot at companies that have, for example, edge applications, make that very secure and safe, so you can actually run things that are small enough and don't be connected to the cloud, but at the same time allow that optimization to happen. So we need to start with the integration side, digitize it, and based on that, I think there's a lot of opportunity for AI to optimize.
If I can build on that, because I think that's really valuable and true, sort of as a major unlock in the energy transition, is between things like grid planning, grid operations, and customers. And so we have a world that is electrifying. Households, businesses are electrifying their heat, their transport. But the point is, grid planners, grid operators oftentimes don't have visibility on that. So it sits dormant behind their customers' meters. And so something that we focus on, so it's similar with suppliers where trading, oftentimes they don't have visibility on what's sitting behind the meters. And then more importantly, they don't trust really that they could ever use that with the same kind of reliability that they're used to in the grid. And so creating that transparency first is a major step. Build bridges within grid operators, between customer-facing teams, and the core operations of planning and grid operations. And similarly, again, for suppliers, between the customer-facing side and trading. AI can do enormous things there to make that visible, transparent. But that's, I guess, a double-edged sword, because a trader would ask, yeah, but can I trust this AI? And so how can you present it in a way that's explainable, that is reliable, and that's then, let's say, another hurdle to overcome?
Could you expand on that, perhaps? You mentioned AI hallucinating, the need for 100% trust, 100% reliability. Are we creating new points of failure away from what already exists, and how do you solve for it in the context of what you're building?
Yeah, if you start from the physical world there, the answer would be, well, if you have 100,000 assets that are distributed, in principle, you can create a very reliable system, and even more reliable than a single asset, single point of failure. Secondly, if you then go to the question, can we trust this AI model? I think that takes conversations today to actually explain to people like traders and to show backtest simulations. That's something that we have invested in quite heavily, that you can show this is how you would trade this portfolio of customer assets throughout a year. And we just show them the data, and they see the decisions that are taken. They see the types of controls that are applied, and that builds trust. It's a bit like, well, as a consumer, in the beginning you used ChatGPT and thought, oh, is this thing trustworthy or not? No, that takes a while. But making it as explainable as possible by really showing the way these controls work if you apply AI is a major step in gaining that trust. But that takes a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Can I comment on this? Because I mean, and I'm a little biased. I typically trust computers more than humans. But I actually think we're at an interesting point in history where we are often held back kind of by what you're saying, that people need to have trust. And then we create these systems where it's an AI, let's call it a power trader, right? There are a lot, but we don't fully trust it making decisions. So we also have a human validating it, and you don't get best, you get worst of both worlds, where you don't get the speed of doing it sort of late at midnight when the auction closes, and you don't get the intuition that a trader has. And I do think that we also should be better at allowing in a controlled and safe environment, but really showing this is what full automation looks like. It's not just human in the loop adding a little bit of extra power to a current job. It is actually a whole different way of operating where the real value lies. And definitely, let's backtest it, make sure it's there, but let's try also not to block the development.
Yeah, you saw it. I mean, with reinforcement learning, deep reinforcement learning, initially, I mean, I guess for, I don't know exactly how long, but a year, 2 years, OpenAI was testing with humans actually responding and doing the thumbs up, thumbs down on whether the answers were right. You do have, let's say, transient periods where it needs to be validated sufficiently before being brought to market. And so I think you're always going to have that a bit, but you can call it backtesting if you want, or you can call that normal validation of your models. And then secondly, I think in AI, explainable AI, really the only thing it does is bring it from a black box to something that is more explainable to a typical user. And that can be useful, I think. So that doesn't mean, let's say, a human in the loop for the decisions, but that can say, you know what, this decision was taken from essentially a principal component analysis. These were the most relevant features that I used in that decision, and that can get somebody like an operator trusted more. So some of that transparency out of AI can be useful there.
Building on what you just mentioned, like what is the hard success metric that you're chasing? You mentioned talking to cities, municipalities. I think, Jan, you mentioned like DSOs, TSOs, that sort of value chain. Like what matters ultimately in terms of outcomes for your customers?
I mean, for me and for us, it's still core business logic. Right? I think that's very important and cut through the noise. It is speed of deployment of new assets that helps the system, and it is return on those deployment, better allocation. And then somewhere it trickles into forecasting, RMSE, machine learning, but this is a very important point. You also have to cut through the hype of the cool models versus the bottom line. So a practical example we've seen is you can gain a little bit on a top line in trading. Again, it's just always a good example. But if you don't manage your tariffs and your contracts well in that AI, it doesn't really matter. You get order of magnitude better on the project by doing negotiations, for example, with AI help.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. For us, for the end customer, it's super simple. How much discount can we give on your energy bill every year? That's a euro or a dollar number. For the retailers, for the energy companies that we work with, it's customer lifetime value, it's customer acquisition cost. So embedded in customer lifetime value is churn, is margin, and the customer acquisition cost. And these are sort of the core metrics for them. So we also want to think from the fundamental business metrics and then look back and see what are the biggest drivers there. And so, for instance, to your point, you can create enormously complex power system optimizations, but when 90% of the value is just behind the meter grid tariff, we just focus on that and don't start over-engineering something that is going to add 5%.
Amen.
That's harder sometimes to negotiate with your engineering team, who quite love that overbuilding sometimes. So.
Ellen, I guess I have a question for you, combining these two thoughts. So on one hand, I'm hearing, cost saving for customers. On the other hand, it's perhaps like a vision they want to manifest. Like, what matters to you when you look at companies sort of innovating within the AI energy space?
I think we look a lot at sort of the actual business value, so cost savings, or like what's the value proposition. Probably a bit over the vision. Like, it's good to have that vision, but I think ultimately for the customers that you sell to, it's about that near-term impact. And I think when you talk about energy, it's very often measured in sort of like a cost-saving aspect to it, because that's ultimately that's driving business value. So that's what we see most.
Absolutely, makes sense. I love asking this question. I will, find out how you feel about it. But like, if you had a magic wand or like a dream wish list, like, what is the most impactful thing that, from your point of view, moves the needle in terms of energy transition?
I think for me it would be that policy and technology solutions are so aligned that the truly best economical and technical solutions will win the fastest. And that's a high-level statement. We can go in more detail on that, but today still the way, for instance, grid operators think about their grid is not in that way. And there are still patterns of being focused on CapEx and T&D infrastructure upgrades when a lot of other more economical decisions are possible. And creating that alignment that will really make that very buzzing ecosystem of startups more successful and bring products from pilot to real scale. And that is what we need.
Yeah, it's going to be in the same vein that most people in this room still, and us included, optimize their own little corner of the system. If there's one wish I would have, it is how do we facilitate optimizing the system as a whole, with planning, with production, with consumption, with and it's a wish, of course, but one step is policy, getting that better. On markets, we've solved it with capitalism and dynamics. That has partially, but then it's completely decoupled from the cost, for example. How do you align those two? I think that will be, an interesting point with AI, right, is now all the grid companies are screaming that the data centers are going to break their lines. How do you make big tech pay for copper lines and storage and other things? How do we make that whole system and how a surface for where you can apply higher level intelligence?
I think you both sort of touched on policy and regulation. I'm sure there's like founders in the room. Would love to hear, I guess, all three of your perspective on what do you do with regards to lobbying or getting the right policies on board to create these sandboxes, so to speak, to speed and deployment of your products?
The first company I founded was in 2010, a pioneer in virtual power plants. In the end, it grew to quite some scale. But at that point, it was truly a novel concept. And so we really had first conversations with grid operators, executive teams, where you needed to explain what that virtual power plant would be, and you said, where does that then run? Oh, it's software, is that on a data center? Mm-hmm. How do you test such a thing? We don't plug in something in a turbine that we can... So all of those conversations that required quite a lot of alignment between regulators, transmission system operators, and others in the ecosystem. That was a very intense choice for a first startup, because it's so much work at the same time. Of course, you have the fruits of that as well. Once we could break through some of those barriers, we were first to market in UK, in Belgium, in other countries. In a way, we've tried to, with Beebop now, avoid some of that same lobby effort, or the needs of the same lobby efforts. Nevertheless, we speak with policymakers regularly. I think the main thing that we want to do is speak from first principles, just in terms of, you know, affordability of the system, the clean aspects of the system, and then the reliability of the system, and just show why some of these more modern solutions using distributed energy resources optimize for that the best. So if you stick with the first high-level principles, and then you can bring that to life with real data, at least that sets something in motion. That doesn't mean that it's fast enough, but nevertheless, that there's a good combination of principle and data that can help.
Yep. I have one actually concrete example from one of our portfolio companies on this topic, and in principle, it's interesting to think about that the European Union has a very strong one market mentality. So they try to link energy markets across different countries as much as possible. And they also sincerely believe in a market-based approach, so that you should balance based on price signals, in that sense create the most optimal system. That doesn't in reality always happen, right? Because the individual grid operators in individual countries still like to have their own bilateral different agreements, but that makes it hard for startups like yours to scale across regions, and it's complicated to integrate, and you have to adhere to all these different regulations. So one of our portfolio companies actually was also running into some of these problems, and they were successfully lobbying actually to enforce that European central market mechanism, which changed actually the regulation in Germany, and that has a huge impact on their business case. So there's actually opportunities there, but it's taken a long time, of course. It took them a long time. But I think it's always good for us as investors and startups and founders to always keep pushing and work towards that one European market perspective, especially when it comes to energy, because it makes it much easier to scale, to build really large, successful companies, and to sort of balance the system as a whole. So I think that's the perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're the bigger lobbyist. We call ourselves a startup, but we have 2/3 of the best volume in Sweden, right? And the biggest in Finland also being built. And that puts us in a position where we can actually influence. And I think the core is realizing that the regulators are also scrambling to figure these things out, like capacity and transmission and all of it, and pointing out, like, guys, we've been through 30 of your whatever qualification processes. Here are the 2 ways you could make that a lot easier for everyone. I think pointing out that it's not an either or, many times it's a win-win solution. If you can somehow remove these barriers, we can also help your system a lot. And then, as you say, very much streamlining European-wide, that would go a long way. And I think we've pitched some ideas to the International Energy Agency. They're like, whatever you can do, any good ideas, we need this and we need it fast.
What helps too is crises, and that's a tricky topic to talk about. But so we sometimes still live in illusion that energy supply is secure with the energy system that we have in Europe, for instance. The horrific conflict in the Ukraine that year of 2022, and suddenly these prices shooting up, that certainly set things in movement. And so again, I'm not going to argue in favor of any conflict here, But we saw something similar, maybe it was already a decade ago in Belgium, and at some point there were problems with the nuclear reactors that had fissures. And suddenly there was a need for capacity in the market. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, but now we will use anything that we can get our hands on, and let's look at these new solutions. And that provided quite a bit of breakthrough. Again, because it puts you outside of the illusion of energy security, reliability, etc., that some of us are still under.
No, it's very, very timely. I'd love your view building on that. How do you think about optimizing, using, or like making the most of existing infrastructure versus building new assets in the light of supply chain risks and obviously like high interest rates, so on and so forth?
Tough question. We're in the business of building assets, but I think it is important to recognize which assets and also help being in front of what type. Is it installing smart meters? Is it utility scale BESS, or is it big copper lines? And I mean, one of the things we do practically is we do a scenario simulations over Europe and say, you can either expand this part of Germany with a lot more copper, or you can save 5 billion capex by deploying some storage, right? And that's obviously in our interest, but making sure the decision makers are informed of what can actually be done, and taking it back to AI, saying like, this is how these assets can operate if they're smart. Right? Yeah. This is what they can really alleviate, is with the latest technology, with full access to data, and this is why it's this is the utility you get from it at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I would say on top of that, of course, our business is to involve the customer as well, the consumer with that. I think in Europe we have some track record of making the consumer victim of the energy transition rather than making it an opportunity. And sometimes also across the social divide, with solar incentives, etc., that are put into grid tariffs. And so making these consumers partners in the energy transition, so that they feel that they can reap the benefits as well. In our case, that's by saying, okay, you actually have assets that are very valuable to the power system, and we can manage them for you so that you can get the same benefits that maybe a trader of a dedicated utility scale battery or the operator of a gas-fired plant can get. So that then they can lower their energy costs and they can feel the benefits again from the clean energy transition.
I love the way you three connected the dots between AI helping energy transition across a lot of boring, tedious tasks, contracts, legal documentation, making emails easy, so on and so forth, to making the most of what we have today. On the flip side, I guess, what if we're wrong? Like, what other opportunities exist from the fears of AI doing the wrong thing, so to speak?
And so are you asking for what kind of scenarios can happen if we're wrong about the reliability of AI?
What opportunities are we missing out? Or like, what are we not thinking about that we should be thinking about to create a more resilient European energy market?
I would say one of the risks is that we deploy a lot of money that's wasted. I think we've seen that obviously a little bit in early, maybe I'm saying something controversial, but like around hydrogen and also direct air capture and like these type of things. Billions were put into that, and I don't think we're really reaping the benefits of it. And I think that's the risk that we run into with AI as well, right? Like we invest a lot in this technology and it's not really delivering, and we're not spending that time and money and talent, because we obviously have a talent shortage, on things that could have worked otherwise, such as actually building out the critical infrastructure and building the physical assets. Because we believe that we can get more out of the system that we have with those technologies. But if we don't, then we're going to have a problem. That's one way.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's also worth considering right now we're talking a lot about solving the problems with software and AI. There's also hardware solutions to many things. If everyone had a small fusion reactor in their basement that was perfectly flexible, then no need for storage or anything else, right? And accounting for the full solution space, definitely. Yeah. Then I think wrong in AI, this is a separate strand, but to your question about crisis, everyone is also fearing AI build out, right? And the impact on the grid now, that is very hard to gauge. Yeah. And I think we risk either an under or a very high overcapacity in the system.
Yeah. And the AI that we use for our solutions should not increase the problem more than we're solving it. I think that's also a good principle to keep this.
That's a great takeaway. Maybe to wrap it up, what is one thing you want the audience to leave today?
Ooh, good question. Overall, I think the energy transition is still picking up and still accelerating. And just as AI is early, I think we're still also early in the whole transition in the energy system. I think that they can accelerate each other. So we're very optimistic and hopeful, despite, of course, that there's a lot of rumors and things and developments lately that are less hopeful. So I think the economic incentives are there. I think the talent are there. The companies are there. So I think that's the main message that we want to give.
Yeah. And I think there's enormous potential, and I think we're going to need almost all types of assets and intelligence. It's a win-win, and it's more about being fast enough. And then I think summing this up, right, the boring solution is often the most valuable, whether it's a good middleware or it is automating contracts. Like that's really how we get deployed solution that transitions the system.
Yeah, and generally speaking, I would hope that next to cute AI-generated videos, we can apply AI to real problems that are going to have massive impact on future generations. And I think that's the opportunity that we have been discussing here, in that enormous progress through AI is accompanied by progress on other domains as well. And I think that's an important one to keep in mind. Connectivity, cybersecurity, all of these things need to be checked as well if we want to really make this a working, functional energy system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I add a comment to this? I think it's something we haven't talked about a lot, but I really agree that AI creation and modeling and coding is also becoming more and more commoditized. It's easier and easier to do and get and outsource. That just means that domain expertise on cyber, on whatever system, energy, of course, becomes more and more important, like steering it. And that's also really what we should think about, setting up, you know, my own tech teams or our company and so forth.
No, 100% agree with you. Building a product is incredibly easy these days, but building the right business that will scale and reach a certain level, I think it all comes down to like domain expertise and having the right path to your customers ultimately. But I would end on that note, and huge thank you to all of you, and thanks for your audience as well. Thanks for joining us.